generous and moving introduction. I can't help but feel that part of what moves you is this terrible tragedy in these times. And it's in these times that we want our friends and our family with us. And we acknowledge you, the friendship that we've had over 15 years now. Rabbi Hier, Rabbi May, Wiesenthal Center. And we acknowledge Rabbi Muskin. Thank you, the entire congregation of Young Israel of Century City, for hosting this service today. The last few weeks turned the attention of the world back on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Reports of increased rocket fire in Israeli towns forced Israel to confront its enemies on the streets of the Gaza Strip. Just last week, we opened up the national celebration, the 60th anniversary of the founding of Israel, the birth of Israel. I remember walking in to the theater that evening, an evening of celebration, and confronted the people of hate, people who would like nothing else but to allow us to stand here today after this tragedy and do nothing and say nothing. And to them we say, no. No, we will come together. We will come together and speak out against this terror. Counter-terrorist operations, gun battles, the deaths of Israeli soldiers have returned to the headlines. The peace process just starting to regain some signs of promise has been left in shambles once again. The Palestinian leader condemns military incursions meant to halt terrorist activity given free rein for far too long. Israeli officials pledge to continue doing what is necessary to defend the state of Israel. And sitting in a library in the midst of study and worship, 8 students lose their lives. They did not provoke the attackers. They did not advocate violence. They did not seek conflict. These young boys simply sought new paths to connect with their heritage, new ways to celebrate their faith, new ties to the history of religion and a nation defined by the pursuit of peace and justice and shaped by the call to perfect the world. As the rabbis would remind us, these students of wisdom increased peace around the world. Perhaps it would be easier to confront such a horrific act if the victims were older. They had already led long lives. But these victims had barely escaped childhood. 6 of them were teenagers. All of them were devoted students, committed sons of Israel, and devout defenders of the Jewish state. And that makes this tragedy even more unbearable. Israel today faces another great challenge in a seemingly endless conflict. Once again, it must show the world the true meaning of courage in the face of terror. It must demonstrate the power of hope in a region consumed by fear. It must rely on its values for guidance, fighting enemies without regard for human dignity. And as it's done in the last 60 years, Israel must defend itself against foes dedicated to its destruction. The 8 students whose lives were cut short on Thursday represented the best of Israel. As Hamas and its supporters used their children as shields against Israeli soldiers, these young people reminded us of why the Jewish people have long stood as a light unto the nations. They've illustrated why Israel's greatest strength lies with its people. They've showed us the reason Israel will persevere for generations to come. May we all honor their memories with a renewed dedication to Israel's security, with the resolve to support the safety of Israel's families, and with the hope in our hearts that the dream of peace, coexistence, and nonviolence will become a reality in the near future. I come today as a mayor whose mission it is to unite its people. We're a diverse city, maybe the most diverse anywhere in the world. We're a city where we honor our traditions, we honor our religion, and our many faiths represented by the diversity of this city. But we're also a city that stands for the idea that peace cannot come without justice. We're also a city that believes that in a city with the largest Israeli population outside of Israel, that we have a responsibility, a unique responsibility, to stand up in defense of Israel, to stand up for peace, to speak out against the terror that consumes the Middle East, and to say that we stand with you. Thank you so much.